Hey, do you want to see a jump scare? Whoa, get that off my screen. But seriously though, this is a video I've been wanting to make for as long as I can remember, or about 2 days ago, because there is nothing more controversial than the age-old question of sub versus dub when it comes to anime. Some people swear by the subs and some people by the dubs. But English dubs have always had it hard, bless them, they can't catch a break. Everywhere you look, there's always some anime puritan preaching about how, if you like dubs, you are quite literally the worst person on the planet, because subs are better than dubs. But honestly, I can't stand this attitude. If you've ever looked on the toxic wasteland, otherwise known as Reddit, you'll see this radical loyalty to subs everywhere. But as a general rule, does the statement that subs are better than dubs work? Yeah, it does. If it's an anime you've never heard of, chances are the quality of voice acting in Japanese would be better than English. It's much more authentic, nothing gets lost in translation, it more often than not matches the anime's setting, and Japan's voice acting industry is both much larger and more specialised than the Western world. But although this statement is a general rule of thumb, is it a definitive rule? Absolutely not, because some dubs are incredible. So I think it would be a good idea to talk about some of the shows that I personally believe have dubs on par with the sub, or even a dub better than the sub. For example, Baccano, considered by many to be the pinnacle of English dubbing in anime. So this isn't exactly an unpopular opinion, because you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who dislikes Baccano's dub. Going back to some of the points I made earlier about how dubs can feel less authentic and not fitting for the anime setting usually in Japan, but in this case, it could not be further from that. Baccano is set in 1930s Prohibition gangster America, so naturally a cast of American voice actors works well off the premise alone, but then combine that with the fact that all of the voice actors chosen were simply just incredibly talented, with a lot of the actors nailing the accents of their respective characters.
Well, up until not too long ago, I was known all around by the name Claire Stanfield. Yeah, I'm not so sure. I can't figure out if she wants to meet up so she can kill me, or if it's because she actually likes me. It's driving me a little crazy, you know?
That traditional New York East Coast gangster accent, absolutely nailed by most of the cast, is what I believe really elevates this dub to its legendary status it holds now. It just feels right, complementing the setting perfectly, and it's no surprise this may have been the longest casting process Funimation has ever held. They really did search long and hard to find the talent needed to fill the shoes of Baccano's characters, and needless to say, it paid off. It's so rare in anime to find voice acting this believable. No good gangster story feels right without that traditional rough around the edges New York accent. You know which one I'm on about. I mean, could you imagine watching something like Goodfellas dubbed in Japanese? That just doesn't sound right. Baccano is a rarity in the fact that it not just has talented English voice acting, but the tone, the setting, the characters, absolutely everything is in favour of the dub. But with that being said, let's move on, and as a side note, if you haven't seen Baccano, please watch it. It's one of my favourite anime of all time, for more than just the dub obviously. So let's continue with this idea of accents in anime dubs, why don't we? Because a lot of the time, they aren't too great. Case in point, the first two parts of JoJo had a lot of different nationalities. British characters like Jonathan and Joseph, Italian characters like Caesar and Suzy Q, and German characters like Nazis. Lots of Nazis. But anyway, especially in part 2, with how diverse the cast is, we see American voice actors trying their best to replicate these foreign accents. Emphasis on trying.
My father then took up his torch and spent his life hunting the mask. We Italians have the strongest familial bonds of any culture in the world.
It doesn't work too well in my opinion, and I can see why after part 2, they continued with regular American accents regardless of nationality. I mean, could you imagine what it would be like dubbing all of the Italians in part 5? The only real good way to incorporate an accent is if that voice actor genuinely does have that specific accent. A good example of this would be Great Pretender, where a lot of the cast during the arc in London have voice actors from the UK. Whether it's more Cockney London accents or more posh spoken Southern English accents, it's pretty authentic and works quite well in my opinion. And while we're on the topic of Great Pretender, let's get on to the first 10 minutes of the anime from episode 1, which is kind of in a limbo between being a sub and a dub, considering it's exactly the same in both versions. We have Japanese characters speaking both Japanese and broken English, as well as Laurent speaking English with a French accent, as well as broken Japanese. It really is a shame this lasted for only 10 minutes because it's such a unique idea and technically eliminates the need for a dub if it's just the same either way. It's really hard to explain this, so if you understandably have no idea what I'm on about, have a little look at the opening 10 minutes for yourself and see what I mean. But anyway, let's move on to some other anime that I believe have fantastic dubs. And for a really famous example, Steins is pretty widely considered as having a good dub. In particular, J. Michael Tatum, the legend behind the voice of our protagonist Okabe Rintaro, is absolutely incredible in my opinion. Steins is a show where I believe your enjoyment is severely affected by how you feel about the protagonist. A lot of people don't like Steins because they don't like Okabe's character. His mad scientist personality can be a bit off-putting I suppose, but in that regard, he absolutely knocked it out of the park, and quite honestly, I prefer dubbed Okabe over subbed Okabe. But the thing is, I'm probably a bit biased due to the fact that from my experience, whatever language you first watch a given anime in, that is it. You won't be able to hear anything else afterwards. The likes of Baccano and Steins I watched for the first time in the dub, and although I'm sure the sub is fantastic, it's just hard for me to get used to, especially when there are big differences between the two. Take good old DBZ for example, as Goku's voice actors are completely different. In the dub he's a man with a deep voice, and in the sub it's a woman with a much more high-pitched voice. What I'm saying is that I think there is a huge amount of bias when it comes to the question of subs versus dubs. Obviously, whichever one you started out with and are familiar with is the one you prefer, it's as simple as that. Nowadays I tend to only watch subs, but if anyone prefers the dub of a show that I like, that's completely fine, it's all personal preference and I respect that. Unless you're talking about the best dub in anime history. The dub of a little known series known as Ghost Stories is legendary for all of the wrong but also right reasons. Basically, the dub of this anime is absolutely nothing like the original, transforming it from a somewhat serious and grounded supernatural story into the biggest shitpost I have ever seen, and it is glorious.
When he died, I was so sad that I would never hear that voice again. His laugh. His funny little requests.
Touch me.
His reprimands.
Touch me harder.
The most commonly believed story as to why this is the case is because this anime, Ghost Stories, was poorly received in Japan, and as a result, the licensors gave full creative control to the English dubbing team to do whatever was necessary to salvage this anime, resulting in what a lot of people consider the worst dub of all time, which is a load of rubbish. This is art. It is unironically hilarious, and please, I would urge you to look up some of the clips from the Ghost Stories dub. You're on YouTube right now, have a little look. And you can tell this dub is from 2001, a lot of the jokes are way too offensive to be broadcast nowadays, but anyway, how about we continue by talking about other anime from around this time period. The 90s and the 2000s were where hatred for English dubs were at their peak, and to be honest, rightfully so, there were some god-awful dubs around that time. This is why I believe the whole subs versus dubs argument is a pretty old-fashioned debate. Most people who despise dubs with a burning passion were most likely exposed to the atrocities committed by humanity at the time, such as warfare, terrorism, and early 2000s localization. If you got into anime, say post-2015, I don't think you have any legitimate reason to genuinely hate dubs. Most modern dubs are anywhere from average to amazing. It's gotten to the point where you don't really see genuinely bad dubs like you did in the 2000s. But with that being said, Cowboy Bebop is what a lot of people point to as one of the first great dubs, especially considering how well it holds up today, over 20 years later. Cowboy Bebop is the creme de la creme of dubbing in the 90s. It's iconic, and much like Baccano, I can only hear these characters' voices in English, anything else just feels off. Likewise, although much less popular, Monster has a fantastic dub, of which I can only hear in English. Again, there's not much to be said, all of the cast just nail their performances, especially Keith Silverstein, the actor behind Johan. If you want to talk about specific voices matching perfectly with specific characters, then this is it. Johan's chilling psychopathic nature comes across perfectly in the dub. Even when speaking normally, he always makes you feel uneasy.
You did have quite a drinking problem.
I mean, you were drunk when you shot that boy, isn't that right?
He was old enough to rape and murder 9 women and almost killed 2 more.
So you executed him?
No, I didn't!
Right, pardon me.
These two are great examples of outliers from this time that had great dubs in an otherwise never-ending sea of mediocrity to downright terrible. A lot of what is widely considered to be some of the more mediocre dubs can be attributed to some of the longer-running shonen titles: Naruto, Bleach, Fairy Tail, One Piece. Let's talk about One Piece's infamous 4Kids dub, one of the biggest factors towards the hatred of English dubs nowadays. Now, I should make it absolutely crystal clear that I'm not familiar at all with One Piece. I've been meaning to watch it, apart from the fact I don't plan to live that long, but even still, from what I've seen, I'm offended by how 4Kids absolutely gutted this show. Most of these problems arise from localization from Japan to the United States to make it more suitable for a young American audience. But some of these changes are so unnecessary that you can't understand their reasoning. Of course, you've got the infamous changing of the cigarette in the Japanese to a lollipop in the American, and the general use of more Western words and concepts. But why though? I can kind of understand getting rid of guns and alcohol, even though it's still presented in a cartoonish, light-hearted manner, but some changes just seem completely pointless. Like, was it really necessary to change onigiri rice balls to cookies? I know this really isn't about the dub performance itself, which by the way is god-awful, but still, it's worth mentioning. But regardless now, it's about time to get onto the series that I'm contractually obliged to talk in every one of my videos, Gintama, of which it's a bit of a mess when it comes to the dub. Only episodes 1 to 49, 266 to 316, and the first movie are dubbed. From what it seems, all by different studios, with the rest only staying in Japanese. As I was saying earlier about only being able to hear the likes of Baccano or Cowboy Bebop in English, here it's the complete opposite. Gintama has such distinct recognisable voice acting that I could not imagine it in any other language other than Japanese. Until I watched the first movie dubbed. Oh my god, it is without question my least favourite dub in anime. I'm sure there's lots of dubs that are objectively worse than this, but subjectively, from how much I love Gintama, this is awful. And just to make it clear, I'm talking specifically about Gintama's dub for this movie, not any other parts of the series that have likewise been dubbed and are much better from what I've seen. But anyway, to anyone who's never seen Gintama, what do you think this character would sound like? She's an old lady who smokes, maybe her voice is a bit aged, croaky, rough, but no, she sounds like this.
I was on the poster, so I wondered when I was going to appear, and there I was at the end, this small little schmutz with no lines.
What? She does not sound like her character whatsoever. How did this happen? She's from suburban Edo, not Alabama. What the fuck?